Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Energy Quick Chat, where we rub minds with stakeholders and players in the energy market. I am Justina Okechukwu. Now, Pan-African investment research firm Hawilti recently released a new study on gas for Africa in partnership with the International Gas Union at the just concluded Egypt's 2023. The report, which was endorsed by the African Energy Commission and the Africa Finance Corporation, argues for a pragmatic use of natural gas reserves to support a broad industrial and economic development for Africa in a way that is sustainable and enables a just energy transition. Joining me now to discuss this is Mickael Vogel, Director and Head of Research at Hawilti. Now, Mickael, talk me through the key highlights of your latest Gas for Africa report for 2023.
All right. So I think the work we have done with the International Gas Union over the past 6 months is look at where the continent actually is in terms of gas adoption for energy access and for the energy transition. What we have, just to sum up the key takeaways, is a continent that remains extremely energy poor, and we'll speak about that in a minute. I do think a lot of people do not understand what energy poverty is, and then we look at the potential of gas in terms of gas-based industrialization, energy access, electricity production, decarbonization. We identify key barriers to development, whether it is finance, infrastructure, or policy, and then finally come up with key guiding principles that we think, if applied properly, could further unlock the potential of gas for socioeconomic development on the continent.
Now, having said that, so what's the role of natural gas in Africa's just energy transition? All right.
So first, when we speak about the just energy transition, is because we think everything needs to start with energy access, right? You do not, there's no reason to speak about an actual transition per se unless you actually start by having widespread energy and electricity access across the continent that you can actually decarbonize and expand in a sustainable way. So for us, we see gas playing several key roles and contributions, both at homes and in industries. One is obviously the development of gas-based industrialization and the growth of energy-intensive industries like steel and cement. Two is the generation of baseload electricity, especially in countries that do not have cleaner alternatives like hydropower or geothermal. Three is the displacement of coal and diesel in power, and the displacement of biomass, fuel wood, charcoal, and kerosene at home. And then finally, gas can also be the anchor for resilient and stable power systems that you can decarbonize in the future with hydrogen, carbon capture storage, and renewable gas.
Now, in what way should Africa ensure that there is a broader penetration of gas in the energy mix for economies?
I think one key figure to keep in mind is that gas represents on average 16 to 20% of the global energy mix, but on the continent it's only 5 to 7%. So most of the energy used in Africa remains largely dominated by traditional, polluting, and often expensive sources of energy, like again biomass, fuel wood, charcoal, diesel. And so if they're not imported at very expensive prices, then they're consumed with lots of damage for public health. So what we are saying is, a better adoption of gas is not just about bringing electricity, but it's also about developing an energy mix that's a lot more sustainable and modern and more affordable for everybody on the continent.
So, Mickael, how can Africa maximize the huge potential in its vast gas deposits, and what do the numbers show?
So I think first, the numbers show that obviously most of the gas Africa produces remains largely exported. So the continent produces some 6% of the world's global gas supply, but consumes very little of it. With the exceptions of Libya and Egypt that actually manage to consume most of their gas locally, the rest of the continent exports it. So in countries like Mozambique and Nigeria, 80% of the gas that actually goes to market goes to overseas markets. In Angola, Cameroon, or Equatorial Guinea, it's over 60%. So what we are saying is, if you want to actually be serious about gas in Africa, you need to start reorienting some of those strategies towards the domestic market. There are several ways to do that, of course, but when you talk about domestic projects as opposed to export project, you come with the whole bunch of new challenges and barriers to development, such as access to finance, limited infrastructure, and some policy uncertainty that we think needs to be addressed as well. But finally, the benefits of gas locally, what people need to understand is it's not just about electricity production. It's about what you can do with gas in industry, transport, and households as well.
So, your report reveals that more than 20 African markets have discovered gas, yet penetration remains minimal. Why is this the case?
I think first, it's a very important thing to state that when we speak about gas in Africa, we typically focus on Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, maybe Mozambique, markets with very, very large reserves. But as you said, almost half of the continent has discovered gas and already monetizes it in some shape or form. Countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, or Rwanda all actually have domestic gas production that they use for power, transport, industry, and so on. The only difference is the scale of those developments has remained very limited compared to the potential of using that gas for domestic development. So consumption on the continent is some 160 billion cubic meters of gas per year, but is mostly focused on North Africa. The reason why is because a lot of the demand is in sub-Saharan Africa is decentralized and scattered across small centers, whether in remote areas, across very large space and land, which means that for you to actually make the investment to reach those demand centers requires a lot of capital for very little returns. So the problem of what we call the chicken and egg puzzle of infrastructure is very much there when it comes to gas in sub-Saharan Africa. The second barrier is obviously access to capital. It's a lot more profitable at the moment to invest in export gas projects rather than domestic gas projects. So you do have a challenge accessing financing and capital for your domestic gas projects. The last one relates to overall policy uncertainty and maybe security risks in some parts of the continent, like in northern Mozambique or in the Gulf of Guinea. But overall, we think that if you manage to unlock infrastructure investments, and we do have some solutions for that, access capital, which we also have, a few avenues and innovations that we think could be adopted to unlock access to capital. And then finally, provide more certainty around policy, then you actually can unlock further domestic gas potential on the continent.
Now, you have mentioned all of this, but how do we reconcile Africa's gas future in light of continuous energy poverty and climate change? Now, and also, what does the future look like from your assessment?
So what we've done is not necessarily come up with the forecast, but come up with what the potential of a better gas adoption could have. So we just highlight key scenarios where if gas is used in a pragmatic way, we say it could unlock such and such positive socioeconomic development impact. To get there are a few principles that you need to adopt. So if you adopt that approach, you reconcile, as you said, the need to develop the continent right now and promote energy access while paving the way for a just energy transition by 2050 and beyond. Those principles include, regionalization. For instance, we see huge potential in regionalization, things that have happened between Mozambique and South Africa and that are happening in the East Mediterranean around Egypt can be replicated in Central Africa, can be replicated in West Africa, and to a lesser extent to East Africa as well. So that's the first thing. Second as well is you need to start reforming domestic markets, have electricity markets that are more liquid so you can unlock additional investments around gas to power. Promote the adoption of small-scale gas technologies. We actually, as much as the continent is big and developing fast, you need to start with small gas projects that can de-risk business model and then scale up in the future. That has worked really well in Nigeria, for instance. And then we also see huge potential in carbon markets and pricing emissions around gas to actually unlock additional financing as well. All of this put together gives you a very pragmatic strategy and approach to reconcile the need for development now with the just energy transition needs.
Now, having said all of this, in what way can Africa ensure its energy security amidst the global energy crisis? In
terms of energy security, we see three main contributions or avenues that need to be explored by the continent. The first one is obviously directly linked to domestic energy security. So this is about using gas for electricity, but also gas in industry, transport, and households. So that's the first one. We see very successful case studies in Tanzania, for instance, that should ideally be replicated across the continent. The second one, and we've touched on this a bit, is about the export opportunity and making sure that as you develop export capacity, you make sure that those projects also benefit the local markets in a much more significant way than they have in the past. So that's the second one. The third one is around the decarbonization opportunity. And this is especially relevant if you want your gas to be competitive and attractive globally. It needs to rely on a very sustainable value chain, which means ending flaring in upstream operations, which is a very important thing in the Gulf of Guinea, but also managing methane emissions in your midstream and downstream assets. If you combine those three, you have a very, very good way forward on how to use gas and be competitive globally.
Those are great insights right there, Mickael Vogel, Director and Head of Research at Hawilti. Thank you for giving flesh to that report. And that's it on Energy Quick Chat today. We thank you for watching. Bye for now.